Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my prediction for the upcoming death battle between Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. In this video, I will be going over the characters' backstories, their powers and capabilities, why these characters were paired against each other, and finally, who I think is going to win. As for what I researched for this match, for Crash I covered all of his games as well as his manga. For Spyro, there are actually 3 different versions of the character, and Death Battle said they're going to be focusing on the second Spyro. As such, I focused my research efforts on him and covered all of his games. Unfortunately, I ran out of time, otherwise I would have been happy to cover all 3 versions of Spyro. Thankfully, this version is easily the most powerful of the bunch. As such, I am decently confident regarding who I think is going to win. With all that said, let's get into it. First up is Crash Bandicoot, the mutant hero of Insanity Island. Crash's story is very simple. Once upon a time in Australia, the mad scientist Dr. Neo Cortex was looking to conquer the world by creating an army of mutated animals. Yet for some reason, he decided to give the most impressive mutations to a bandicoot, a creature known for its stupidity, aggressiveness, and refusal to work with others. Yet for some reason, Cortex thought this was the perfect creature to lead his armies. Obviously, it didn't work out. After giving Crash Bandicoot his superpowers, Cortex attempted to brainwash him the way he does all his soldiers. But instead of making Crash loyal, the machine instead made him crazy, which resulted in Crash immediately breaking free and escaping Cortex's laboratory. However, this was not a very well thought out plan, as Crash forgot to rescue his girlfriend on the way out. This meant that now he had to make his way all the way back to Cortex's lab, which would require smashing his way through 3 separate islands all packed to the brim with Cortex's various monsters and minions. Thankfully, Crash gained a valuable ally to help him in his quest, a mysterious magical tiki mask called Aku Aku. This entity was hundreds of years old and sought to protect the islands and the world. Aku Aku didn't like what Cortex was up to, and also thought Crash could use some guidance, to put it lightly, so he decided to lend Crash his aid. Crash, with Aku Aku's assistance, then proceeded to go on a massive rampage across the islands, defeating everything in his path. He even eventually defeated Cortex and rescued his girlfriend. Unfortunately, not too long after being rescued, she dumped him for one of the villains. Feels bad, man. That may have been the last he saw of his girlfriend, but it was not the last he saw of Dr. Cortex. The mad scientist continued to pop up time and time again with new schemes for taking over the world. Sometimes he even invited scarier villains to help him with his schemes. Yet every time, Crash has managed to stop him. Usually not because of any choice on Crash's part. Most of the time it only happens because his allies point Crash in Cortex's direction and just let him loose, but hey, whatever works. That's the story of Crash Bandicoot. Now let's talk about what he can do. Crash is primarily a melee combatant who utilizes his superhuman prowess to access a number of unique techniques. Some of the more mundane techniques I'll throw on the screen right now. These aren't really noteworthy as they mostly just consist of him punching and kicking his enemies. However, he does have a few special techniques, such as his bread and butter offensive move, the spin attack. Using this, Crash spins around like the Tasmanian devil himself and utterly annihilates any enemies foolish enough to get hit by it. Not only does this move deal incredible damage, but it also deflects most projectiles. And after upgrading it to the Death Tornado Spin, Crash can now spin longer, faster, and he can even glide through the air while spinning. The main drawback of this technique was that Crash could only use it for so long before he became dizzy, but he has since overcome that limitation and can now spin indefinitely. Outside of the spin attack, Crash also knows how to double jump, as well as how to use the rocket jump, which allows him to jump approximately 16 feet into the air. He also has the supercharged body slam technique. This consists of Crash jumping into the air before slamming back down to earth with enough force to create a shockwave and break through metal. This attack is difficult to land, but if successful it hits even harder than the spin attack. Outside of combat, Crash also has a number of random abilities. He can burrow through the ground like Bugs Bunny, he is apparently quite skilled in the art of disguise, and he is completely immune to mind control. Furthermore, Crash is skilled enough to pilot all manner of vehicles and advanced machinery. Although he won't have access to those in Death Battle, it's still impressive that he can pilot them at all. Now for Crash's arsenal. First and foremost is Aku Aku. This magical tiki mask is Crash's eternal companion and is always there to provide assistance to Crash. He wields a number of magical powers, but his main job is to protect Crash. To this end, he can create a magical force field around Crash that blocks all minor attacks. However, in order to protect Crash from more dangerous attacks, he has to sacrifice his physical being, which is to say that Aku Aku can block attacks that would be fatal to Crash, but doing so will destroy Aku Aku in the process. Now, this isn't death, as Aku Aku can magically regenerate himself, but should this happen, he will be out of the fight unless Crash breaks open an Aku Aku crate. These crates are scattered throughout Crash's world, and should he break one open, it will summon and regenerate Aku Aku. If Crash breaks open a second crate, Aku Aku will become golden, and in this form he is actually able to block 2 fatal hits for Crash before being destroyed. And should Crash open a third and final Aku Aku crate, Aku Aku will actually attach himself to Crash's face, and for 20 seconds, Crash will have enhanced speed, will instantly kill normal enemies on contact, and he will have 9 vulnerability. He is practically invincible while in this state. Outside of defense, Aku Aku can shoot lasers and create explosions, although the exact power and limitations of these techniques is unknown. He also has the ability to teleport, and while he can teleport Crash as well, this is used exclusively for long-distance travel. Aku Aku cannot teleport Crash while in battle. However, Aku Aku's greatest ability is his power to jack enemies. Should an opponent be stunned, Crash can stick Aku Aku onto their face, at which point the opponent will be possessed by Aku Aku. Once this happens, the foe will be completely under Crash's control. Now, this technique was primarily used to possess a select group of creatures called mutants. I originally wasn't going to include these mutants as part of my analysis because I didn't think they were something Crash could carry into battle. However, as of the game Mind Over Mutant, Crash can now store 1 mutant in his pocket like a Pokemon, which he can then throw out whenever he pleases. This makes it feasible that one such mutant could appear in the death battle. Now, Crash cannot store any mutant like this, there are only a select few that can be stored. As such, I will briefly cover those creatures and what they can do. The Ratsickle has mediocre strength, but it makes up for it with the ability to launch ice blasts that freeze foes. The Magmadon has the greatest physical strength among medium-sized mutants and is immune to lava. It can also launch a directional shockwave of earth and lava at enemies. TK is a psychic mutant that can use telekinesis to grab and throw enemies and objects, and it can launch telekinetic blasts and shockwaves. Battler can launch wind attacks and fly. Grimly can slow down time for a maximum of 22 seconds. Rhino Roller can roll up into a spiky death ball. Sludge can shapeshift and spew toxic waste. Sniper can launch long-range feather projectiles at machine gun speeds, Spikers can impale foes with spikes, and Stench can launch deadly stink bombs. That's all of the mutants, and that's all of the major abilities that Aku Aku brings to the table. Now for the rest of Crash's equipment. He has 2 special pairs of shoes he can wear. The first set is called the Sneak Shoes, and these are pretty worthless because the only power they provide is the ability for Crash to walk on top of nitroglycerin crates. However, his other set of shoes, called the Speed Shoes, are much more useful, as they allow Crash to run at a much faster pace. Crash also has access to a very powerful jetpack. This beauty is so powerful that it was able to drag Cortex and Crash from the Earth's surface all the way to the far outer atmosphere in a matter of seconds. Now, the exact distance they travel is unspecified, but since Cortex, a human, is still able to breathe and talk regularly, we can conclude that they are still within a certain range of the Earth's atmosphere. The absolute greatest height they could conceivably be at is approximately 50,000 feet. In order to travel that distance in a matter of, we'll say, 10 seconds, they would have to be moving at approximately 3,409 miles per hour, or Mach 4.4. That's pretty impressive. Aside from the jetpack, Crash also has his Fruit Bazooka, which is his primary means of fighting at long range. This bad boy fires Wumpa Fruit at a semi-automatic pace, allowing him to absolutely bombard foes. And don't let the fact that it fires fruit trick you. This monster hits far harder than any real-life bazooka. It hits so hard that it can utterly vaporize one of Cortex's robots. In order to vaporize 225 pounds worth of steel, the Fruit Bazooka would have to impact with about 1.5 billion joules of energy. That means each and every shot fired by the Fruit Bazooka hits with as much force as 161 howitzer artillery cannons. That's pretty crazy. Crash has also been known to carry and throw TNT crates at people as an attack. Assuming these crates are packed to the absolute brim with TNT, that would mean each crate detonates with approximately 3 billion joules of energy. That's more than enough to vaporize a human being. Oh, and lastly, Crash also has a yo-yo which he sometimes uses as a weapon. This is only really used in Skylanders, but it hits pretty hard, so I guess it makes for a decent medium-range weapon. That's it for Crash's arsenal. Now let's cover base stats. Crash is ridiculously strong. He was strong enough to rip a tree out of the ground and drag it around, which is pretty impressive. However, far more crazy than his lifting feats are his striking feats. Most notably, he was able to hit hard enough to damage Ripperoo. This is pretty crazy, considering Ripperoo is tough enough to tank a nitroglycerin crate detonating in his face without suffering any damage whatsoever. Assuming these crates are packed to the brim, they would be detonating with approximately 4.7 billion joules of energy. As such, Crash would have to be hitting even harder than that to damage Ripperoo. That would mean getting hit by Crash's spin attack is like getting hit by 503 howitzer artillery cannons simultaneously. In terms of speed, Crash of course has his Mach 4.4 jetpack, but he's also decently fast when running along the ground. He was able to outrun a Triceratops, which are estimated to have speeds of approximately 34 miles per hour. Assuming Crash's speed shoes double his speed, that would mean he is capable of sprinting at a pace of 68 miles per hour. In terms of durability, Crash was tough enough to survive 30 TNT crates detonating in his face. That would mean he survived approximately 91.8 billion joules of energy, which is nearly twice the power of the MOAB, the most powerful non-nuclear bomb ever used in combat. This means you could attack with enough force to level several city blocks and still not kill Crash Bandicoot. In terms of intelligence, Crash doesn't have any. He doesn't win through strategy. He wins through sheer power and by having competent allies. In terms of particular combat feats, Crash has bested armies of monsters, mutants, and robots time and time again, and he regularly beats the villainous Dr. Cortex and his various allies. With such impressive weapons, powers, and a magical tiki mask, there has been no threat to the world that Crash Bandicoot couldn't smash his way through. Now let's talk weaknesses. The biggest weakness Crash has is that he is brain dead. He is ridiculously stupid. He does not strategize, his fighting style is predictable as all get out, and the only reason he hasn't walked off a cliff into lava is because he has allies constantly shepherding him from place to place. Also, Crash does not naturally have any means of battling an airborne foe or a long-range foe, and must rely upon his bazooka and jetpack to compete. This is a weakness because both of those things have the potential to be destroyed. Furthermore, Crash is simply not that versatile of a fighter. His mutants can somewhat supplement his versatility, but he can only carry one mutant into battle, and no matter which one he chooses, all of them have limitations and can be destroyed, just like the rest of his equipment. Aku Aku also has limitations. He cannot help Crash offensively and defensively at the same time, and should Aku Aku be destroyed, it is unlikely that he'll be able to rejoin Crash before the battle is complete. Also, it is implied that the temporary invulnerability provided by Aku Aku when being worn by Crash has limitations, which means that a sufficiently powerful foe could kill Crash even while in this state. And lastly, Crash wins almost all of his battles through his superior base stats, which means that if he faces an opponent with greater base stats than himself, he will almost certainly lose. That's everything I know about Crash. Now let's look at Spyro. This story is a pretty standard prophesized hero affair. Once upon a time, there was this super powerful evil dragon called Malefor, who wanted to destroy the world. However, there was a prophecy that a legendary purple dragon would be born who could stop him. Wanting to avoid this fate, Malefor sent his minions to destroy almost all of the dragon eggs. However, the egg containing the purple dragon was successfully saved when one of the caretakers sent it floating down the river. This egg and the dragon within were found and adopted by a family of dragonflies, of all things. They raised the dragon as one of their own and decided to name him Spyro. However, Spyro eventually learned of his true heritage and decided to set out on a quest alongside his best friend Sparks the Dragonfly in order to discover his destiny. Along the way, he met many powerful dragons who taught Spyro how to wield various magical powers, and Spyro used these powers to defeat Malefor's various minions and even defeated Malefor himself. He even managed to sorta save the entire world. At the very least, he prevented it from being completely destroyed. That's Spyro's story. Now let's look at what he can do. Spyro primarily wields 4 elemental powers which he can channel through his body in order to produce a number of powerful techniques and attacks. These elements are fire, electricity, ice, and earth. We'll go through them one by one. When channeling fire, Spyro can release a torrent of flame from his mouth in a massive cone in front of him. This breath attack doesn't provide much in the way of utility, but it makes up for it by providing consistent damage that can be used at medium range, allowing Spyro to toast his enemies without putting himself in harm's way. It is stated that Spyro's fire is comparable to an exploding volcano. The lava in a volcano can reach temperatures as high as 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, the crematoriums we use to turn humans into dust only reach temperatures of 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning Spyro's fire breath is more than hot enough to turn his foes into ash. Aside from fire breath, Spyro can also launch fireballs that home in on enemies before exploding, and they even send out shrapnel to further damage enemies hit. He also knows the Blazing Comet technique, which consists of him coating himself in flames as he dashes at high speed and damages any enemies he impacts. Next up is electricity. When channeling this, Spyro can launch a continuous stream of medium-range lightning out of his mouth to shock and damage foes. He can even somehow grab them with this electricity and throw them around. He can also launch long-range, heat-seeking electric blasts that, upon impacting an enemy, trap them in a cage of electricity. Spyro can also charge up and launch an electric orb, which not only damages enemies on impact, but can also be remotely detonated to set off a widespread electrical blast. Spyro can also utilize the electric whirlwind technique, which consists of him coating himself in electrical energy before spinning on his tail like a lightning tornado. Enemies hit by this attack are sent flying dozens of feet into the air. And lastly, Spyro can create a sphere of electrical energy around himself that continually shocks any nearby enemies. It is stated that Spyro's lightning has the power of an entire thunderstorm. Now, an average lightning bolt carries approximately 1 billion joules of electrical energy. However, lightning typically only lasts about 30 microseconds. Thing is, Spyro can release a continuous stream of lightning from his mouth for dozens of seconds at a time. So, if we assume he truly does have the power of lightning, that would mean Spyro is blasting approximately 33 trillion joules of electrical energy out of his mouth per second. That's enough energy to power New York City for 3 days straight, and that's just from 1 second of electric breath. That is pretty crazy. Next up is ice. Starting with the breath attack, Spyro can launch a continuous stream of ice out of his mouth. Unfortunately, this attack is rather short range, but it makes up for it in that any enemies hit by it are instantly frozen. This of course leaves them wide open to follow-up attacks. Spyro can also launch long-range, armor-penetrating icicles out of his mouth at a machine gun speed. And if the icicles miss their target, they will then proceed to somehow bounce off the walls, meaning that even missed icicles still pose a threat to Spyro's enemies. Next is Spyro's polar bomb technique, in which Spyro blasts out an ice bomb that, upon detonating, freezes any enemies caught in the blast. It also leaves behind an icy mist that damages any enemies who touch it. This technique is normally a short to medium range attack, but it can be charged up to increase the distance it is fired. Next is the ice tail technique, in which Spyro forms an icy blade on his tail and then spins around, causing any nearby enemies to be damaged and or frozen. And lastly, Spyro can coat himself in ice energy while spinning to create an icy tornado that not only freezes enemy hits, but also throws out icicle spears into nearby foes. Spyro's ice powers are so impressive that he actually causes enemies who are frozen to expand and explode. You see, water expands when it freezes, meaning Spyro is literally causing their internal fluids to freeze, which, upon expanding, effectively causes them to detonate from the inside out. I feel like there's been a lot of that happening lately. The last element on our list is Earth. The breath attack for this technique consists of Spyro releasing a shotgun blast of earth elemental energy out of his mouth. This technique is short-ranged, but it makes up for it by being far more powerful than any of his other breath attacks. It's so potent that it makes a sonic boom every time he uses it, and even massive enemies are sent flying when they're hit by it. Next up, Spyro can launch a ball of earth energy that, upon detonating, creates a massive tornado that traps enemies in a deadly vortex, leaving them wide open to follow up attacks. Next is the Earth Flail technique, which consists of him creating a flail of earth energy that he can smash into enemies or into the ground in order to create earth-shattering shockwaves. Next is the Earth Pound technique, in which he leaps into the air before smashing back down in an earth energy-charged ground pound. This attack is powerful enough to completely crater and upheave the terrain he smashes into. Spyro can also create a spiky earth sphere around himself that he can roll around in at very high speeds in order to damage foes. He can also cause the sphere to ground pound in order to damage all nearby enemies. And lastly, Spyro can launch large, spiky rocks out of his mouth that are enhanced with earth energy. This makes them hit like a truck, and they even fragment into smaller rocks in order to have a wider range of effect. If that weren't enough, Spyro can charge up this attack in order to increase the range, power, and speed of the rocks significantly. While wielding the fully upgraded Earth Breath power, Spyro is described as being a walking earthquake, which can mean a number of different things depending on the magnitude of the earthquake involved. A magnitude 3 earthquake, for example, carries approximately 2 billion joules of kinetic energy. A magnitude 9 earthquake, which is, for the most part, the most powerful natural earthquake that can occur, carries around 500 megatons of energy. That's 10 times more powerful than the most powerful nuclear bomb that has ever been detonated. So Spyro would have to be packing some serious power in order to be comparable to any kind of earthquake. It's also worth noting that Spyro can channel any element through his limbs in order to enhance his melee attacks. Now, all of these elemental powers rely upon a finite pool of magical energy called mana. In order to replenish this mana, Spyro has to destroy special gems called spirit gems. These gems are dropped by enemies and can be found in natural clusters throughout Spyro's world. Because of this, while Spyro can burn through his mana rather quickly, it's not too hard for him to replenish it. And it's not even necessary for him to replenish it when he taps into his ultimate power. You see, Spyro has one other sort of element he can tap into called aether. Aether is leagues more powerful than the regular elemental stuff, but it can't be used all the time. It can only be called upon when Spyro is in dire need of that power, such as when he's fighting a powerful enemy. Should he call upon it though, there are two versions he has access to, which are Light Aether and Dark Aether. Light Aether is a sort of holy life force cosmic energy that is really good at destroying and or purifying evil stuff. When channeling it, Spyro gains the Light Aether Breath attack, which consists of him launching a massive purple laser beam. Unlike regular elemental powers, which rely upon Spyro's limited pool of mana, Aether pulls its power from the cosmos, and can thus be used as much as Spyro pleases. Then there's Dark Aether, which is a sort of evil, twisted version of Aether that, instead of channeling holy life force energy, instead channels purified death and decay. Like Light Aether, Dark Aether grants Spyro access to a purple laser beam, but unlike the Nice Laser, which had a sort of purifying effect, this laser is literally just a death ray. Not only does it leave a trail of death and decay in its wake that can petrify living creatures into unliving stone, but it also just sorta acts like a disintegration beam, in that it literally unmakes the target by breaking them down on an atomic level. Pretty intense stuff. To give you an idea of the scope of Spyro's Aether abilities, at the end of his story, the planet was literally destroyed, and the pieces of the planet were about to be sent flying off into space. However, before this could happen, Spyro used his full power to drag the pieces of the planet back together. He's like the opposite of a planet buster. Regardless, there is one final aspect to Spyro's powers that deserve noting, and that is called Fury. By building up his Fury in battle, Spyro can unleash a single, ultra-powerful attack. What this attack consists of depends on what element he is using at the time. With fire, he unleashes a massive firestorm around himself that roasts all nearby enemies and also bombards them with fireballs. The Lightning Fury attack first bombards nearby foes with lightning bolts, which paralyze them and holds them in place, only for them to then be blasted by a massive electrical explosion. The Ice Fury attack freezes all nearby enemies before bombarding them with countless icicle spears. The Earth Fury attack bombards nearby foes with falling boulders while simultaneously creating a bunch of tornadoes around Spyro. The Light Aether Fury attack consists of Spyro opening a magical portal through which he launches 10 light aether energy blasts, all shaped like Spyro's head, which then proceed to smash into his opponent over and over again. And lastly is the Dark Aether Fury attack, which unleashes wave after wave of dark aether energy, which petrify and disintegrate anyone nearby. It's also worth noting that Spyro gains different temporary enhancements after utilizing any Elemental Fury attack. After using the Fire Fury, Spyro's attacks temporarily deal double damage. After the Electric Fury, Spyro's movement speed and attack speed are increased. After the Ice Fury, he gains the ability to regenerate his health, and his melee attacks freeze foes. And after the Earth Fury, Spyro is temporarily invincible. All 4 of these buffs last approximately 20 seconds. That's all of Spyro's magical abilities. Now let's cover his physical powers. As a dragon, he can of course fly, but he can also ram his foes with his horns or whip them with his tail. In addition, Spyro has been trained in dragon martial arts by the various dragon masters he has trained under. Spyro specifically specializes in knocking enemies into the air before delivering devastating combo attacks, and he's quite good at using his magical powers to set his opponents up in order to be comboed. Outside of his physical abilities, Spyro also has 3 sets of armor that he has the option to wear into battle. These armors come in 3 types: Offense, Defense, and Fury. Each set boosts his power in those areas, and each set also grants him a unique ability. The offensive set boosts the power and speed of his combo attacks and increases the chance of him to disarm his opponent. This set grants him the special ability called Nuclear Hit, which causes his melee attacks to deal ridiculous amounts of damage. The defensive set boosts Spyro's durability, damages any foes who attack Spyro, and slowly regenerates his health over time. This set grants him the special ability called Immune to Stun, which makes Spyro immune to being stunned. The Fury set boosts the duration and power of his Fury abilities, and it increases his chance to combo an opponent. This set grants him the special ability called Fury Breath, which is basically just the purple laser from Aether mode. The main difference being that this laser draws upon Spyro's own mana and drains it really quickly. You may wonder why he would use this clearly inferior ability instead of Aether mode, but you have to remember, Spyro didn't fully unlock Aether mode until the end of his story. Up until then, this armor acted as a convenient workaround. That's it for equipment, now let's look at base stats. Spyro is very strong, although unfortunately he doesn't have many easily measurable feats in this category. For example, in a direct test of strength, Spyro was able to best this massive golem creature in a tug of war. That's pretty impressive considering this monster was strong enough to casually tear down massive stone structures. However, the math necessary to calculate this is beyond me. If it helps, Spyro has also demonstrated that he's strong enough to smash through stone and steel with ease, so that's pretty impressive. In terms of speed, Spyro can sprint along the ground at a respectable pace, however he's at his fastest in the air. His best speed feat came from his final battle with Malefor, in which Spyro traveled all the way to the center of the planet in under 5 minutes. Assuming this planet is comparable to Earth, that means Spyro would have traveled just under 4,000 miles, which puts his speed at 47,508 miles per hour, which is just under 62 times the speed of sound. And this happened while he was battling Malefor, which means his maximum speed is almost certainly higher. In terms of durability, Classic Spyro was able to tank a TNT barrel detonating in his face, which I estimate to be comparable to 4.8 billion joules of energy. Spyro was also able to survive all manner of magical attacks from the likes of Malefor, whose mystical power was such that he could lift entire castles. In addition, Malefor was not only an ancient purple dragon, just like Spyro, but also a master of dark aether magic, meaning that his attacks were incredibly powerful and deadly. In terms of intelligence, Spyro is a competent and skilled fighter, and classic Spyro is infamous for exploiting enemy weaknesses in order to bring them down. In terms of particular combat feats, Spyro has taken down entire armies of monstrous creatures, as well as several entities wielding incredible power, including the aforementioned Golem, the Dark Dragon Cinder, and even Malefor himself. With all that magical power, skill, and physical abilities, Spyro certainly lives up to the name of the legendary Purple Dragon. Now let's talk weaknesses. Spyro is a very well-rounded fighter, but this has resulted in a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none scenario. He's good at everything, but he's not the best at anything. If given time to train, this might not have been such a problem, but Spyro has only really been an active combatant for just a few years, meaning he lacks experience. Also, while Spyro certainly has long-range options, it's certainly not his specialty. In addition, Spyro once had access to the power to slow down time, but he went and exhausted all of his time-slowing ability halfway through his story. And last but not least, while Sparks may be an amusing commentator, he provides zero advantages to Spyro in combat. That's everything I know about these characters. Before I get to my prediction, here's all their similarities and/or reasons for the matchup. 1. Both are classic PlayStation heroes. 2. Both had humble origins and evolved into ridiculously unstoppable monsters. 3. They've met and fought before, but never in a full-blown battle to the death. 4. Both are from series that had their start in the 1990s. 5. Both have a habit of engaging in cartoony antics, including breaking the fourth wall. 6. Both have flying companions. 7. Both started off in platformer games that eventually evolved into hack-and-slash games. And 8. Both are from series that started strong, but then spiraled into unpopular sequels and reboots to the point that their franchises had a foot in the grave, only to have their series revitalized with the release of remastered editions of their original games. That's all the reasons for the match. Now for my prediction. I think the winner of this death battle will be Spyro. This was not a hard call, to be honest. To his credit, Crash is way more powerful than I ever thought he would be. But Spyro is even more ridiculously powerful. I mean, he literally moved a planet! That is some godly power right there. If that weren't enough, Spyro has the advantage in most base stats as well. Now, to Crash's credit, he does appear to have at least a small advantage in strength and maybe even durability. It's hard to say one way or another, on account of Spyro's best feats in those categories being rather nebulous and hard to judge. However, even if we say Crash is tougher, Spyro has multiple means of healing himself, whereas Crash does not. As such, the most you can say is that Crash has a small advantage in strength and durability, whereas Spyro has a gargantuan advantage in speed and power. He's more than 14 times faster than Crash, and he's immeasurably more powerful. The dude literally moved a planet, which is infinitely more impressive than anything Crash is capable of. So it's quite clear from base stats alone that Spyro already takes a hefty lead, but we'll go ahead and switch to secondary stats just to drive this one home. In terms of skill, Spyro has been trained by masters of combat, whereas Crash has no formal combat training whatsoever. In terms of stamina, they're pretty much even. They can both take down entire armies and keep on going. However, Spyro is clearly the more intelligent of the two. He actually strategizes, whereas Crash is the dumbest character I've ever had to research. In terms of versatility, Spyro clearly takes this as well. Crash's arsenal is decently versatile, but most of it can be destroyed or taken away by a few attacks from Spyro. Furthermore, while Crash can utilize a few powers similar to Spyro's through the use of mutants, he can't have more than one mutant at a time, whereas Spyro has all of his powers simultaneously. So versatility definitely goes to Spyro. In terms of mobility, Crash may be able to burrow, which is something Spyro cannot do, but this ability is rendered useless by the fact that Spyro's ability to fly keeps him totally safe while Crash is burrowed, whereas Spyro's earth-shattering attacks are more than capable of reaching Crash while underground. With burrowing out the window and Spyro's vastly superior speed thrown in the mix, it becomes clear that Spyro even has the edge in mobility. In short, with such large advantages in power, speed, versatility, intelligence, and skill, it seems pretty clear to me that Spyro is gonna win this death battle. I'm like 90% certain of this. Now for my Devil's Advocate section. Crash is very powerful, so I could feasibly see him killing Spyro if given the chance. However, with such crazy descriptions of Spyro's powers, along with the planet feat, the only way I could see Crash winning is if Death Battle dismissed the descriptions as hyperbole, while also dismissing the planet feat as an outlier. Anything less than that, however, and I don't see them making any sort of convincing argument for Crash winning this fight. That's it for my prediction, which means we've reached the end of the video. This was a fun match to research. I miss getting to just check out video games. One of the most enjoyable matches I ever got to cover was Metal Sonic vs. Zero, just for how many video games I got to go through. Crash and Spyro are both interesting series, although I think I like Crash more. Just the idea of this unstoppably powerful, brain-dead creature just brings a smile to my face. I wasn't that impressed with Spyro as a character. Elijah Wood just didn't really do much to make his performance interesting. Regardless, I hope this death battle is fun and satisfying for all you guys. I know it's a match a lot of people have wanted for ages, and I look forward to finding out what the next time is. As for the ending pun, I'm gonna go with Spyro was too insane for Crash. Cause, it's called the Insane Trilogy. So, yeah. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.